The silhouette of an M4 Sherman tank emerged from the morning mist, its outline unmistakable against the gray German horizon. The tank's battle-scarred hull bore witness to countless engagements across North Africa, Sicily, Normandy, and now deep into the heart of the Third Reich itself. Fury, the name painted in bold white letters on its 75-millimeter gun barrel, had once been an aspiration. Now, in the bitter winter of 1944, it was a hard-earned reputation. As dawn broke over the Hurtgen forest, Staff Sergeant Don Collier checked his watch. 0530 hours. In 30 minutes, Fury would lead a desperate charge against German defenses that had already claimed dozens of American tanks. Intelligence reported multiple Panzer-Freys, Panthers, and at least 2 Tigers lying in wait. The Sherman, America's mass-produced answer to German armor, was about to face its most formidable adversaries in a confrontation that would test not just American engineering, but the very spirit of its 5-man crew. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? It's incredible to see our historical community spread across the world. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Each subscription helps us continue unearthing these fascinating stories that shaped our world. Now let's get to the story. The story of the M4 Sherman tank begins not on the battlefields of Europe, but in the design offices and factories of America in 1940, as war clouds gathered across the Atlantic. The United States Army, observing the rapid German advance through Europe with growing alarm, recognized that its existing tank force was woefully inadequate. The M3 Stuart light tank and M3 Lee medium tank, while representing significant improvements over previous American designs, were already obsolescent compared to their German counterparts. On August 31, 1940, the U.S. Ordnance Committee met in Washington, D.C. to establish requirements for a new medium tank. Wesson, the Chief of Ordnance, emphasized the urgent need. "Gentlemen, we require a reliable, producible medium tank that can be manufactured in quantities sufficient to equip not just our own armored forces, but potentially those of our allies as well." The resulting specification called for a vehicle weighing approximately 30 tons, armed with a 75mm main gun in a fully rotating turret, with secondary machine guns, powered by an engine providing reasonable mobility, and, crucially, able to be mass-produced using existing industrial capacity. Major General Charles M. The design process moved with remarkable speed by military standards. By February 1941, a wooden mock-up was approved, and by September of that same year, the first pilot model of the T6 medium tank, the prototype designation for what would become the M4, was completed at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. After extensive testing and minor modifications, the design was standardized as the medium tank M4 in October 1941, just weeks before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor would thrust America fully into World War II. The M4's design reflected pragmatic American engineering philosophy. It wasn't optimized for any single characteristic, but balanced multiple competing requirements. Standing 9 feet tall, with a length of 19 feet 2 inches, excluding the gun, and weighing approximately 33 tons depending on the variant, the Sherman represented a significant improvement over the M3 Lee. Its most distinctive feature was the fully rotating turret housing a 75mm M3 gun, which could traverse 360 degrees in just 15 seconds, a crucial tactical advantage. The tank's armor ranged from 0.5 to 2.5 inches thick, sloped at the front to increase effective protection, though still inadequate, against the heavier German tank and anti-tank guns that would later appear. 5 different engines were used throughout production: Continental R975 radial aircraft engines, Ford GAA V8s, Chrysler A57 multibanks, General Motors twin diesel 671s, and Caterpillar radial diesels. This diversity of power plants reflected both the urgency of production and the need to utilize all available industrial capacity. Production began in February 1942 At the Lima Locomotive Works in Ohio, where railroad engineers and metal workers had rapidly retooled their facilities for tank production. Within months, additional factories came online across the United States. Detroit Tank Arsenal in Michigan, American Locomotive Company in New York, Baldwin Locomotive Works in Pennsylvania, Federal Machine and Welder in Ohio, Fisher Tank Arsenal in Michigan, Ford Motor Company in Michigan, Pacific Car and Foundry in Washington, and Pressed Steel Car Company in Pennsylvania. This dispersed manufacturing approach ensured that no single bombing raid could cripple production, a lesson learned from observing the vulnerability of centralized German and British manufacturing. The scale and pace of Sherman production quickly exceeded anything previously attempted in armored vehicle manufacturing. By December 1942, American factories were producing over 1,000 Sherman tanks per month. By the time production ended in 1945, a staggering 49,234 Sherman tanks and related vehicles had been manufactured, more than all German tank production combined throughout the entire war. This industrial achievement represented not just the might of American manufacturing, but also the effectiveness of standardized design, interchangeable parts, and assembly line production techniques pioneered by American industry decades earlier. The Sherman first saw combat with British forces at the Second Battle of El Alamein in October 1942, where 252 newly delivered Miore 1s, the cast hull variant, served alongside British Crusaders and Valentines. Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery, commanding the British Eighth Army, had deliberately delayed his offensive until sufficient Shermans arrived, recognizing the tank's superiority over existing British models. The Sherman's debut was impressive. Its reliable mechanicals, effective 75mm gun, and gyro stabilizer, which helped maintain gun aim while moving over rough terrain, gave Allied forces a qualitative edge over the mixed force of German and Italian tanks they faced. Captain Michael Whitman of the British Royal Tank Regiment later recalled, "The Sherman was a revelation after the Crusader. It didn't break down every 50 miles. The gun could actually penetrate German armor at combat ranges, and perhaps most importantly, it had a proper three-man turret. Commander, gunner, and loader each had their own position and could focus on their specific tasks. The difference in combat effectiveness was immediate and dramatic. This three-man turret, standard in German tanks, but previously absent in British designs, allowed the tank commander to focus on tactical awareness while the gunner and loader operated the main armament, a significant factor in combat that technical specifications failed to capture. As Shermans began arriving in North Africa in larger numbers through late 1942 and early 1943, American tank crews received their baptism of fire in the harsh desert environment. The tank's first major engagement under American colors came during the disastrous Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943, where inexperienced American forces were routed by veteran German units commanded by General Erwin Rommel. Here, the Sherman's technical adequacy could not compensate for tactical inexperience and poor coordination between armor, infantry, and artillery. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Cohen of the 1st Armored Division later testified to Congress, "Our tanks were comparable or superior to most German armor we faced. What we lacked was not better tanks, but experience in how to use them effectively." The lessons of Kasserine Pass were painful, but valuable. American armored doctrine evolved rapidly, placing greater emphasis on combined arms operations and inter-unit coordination. By the time of the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943, American armored forces had developed more effective tactics. The Sherman's reliability proved particularly valuable in the mountainous Sicilian terrain, where German tanks frequently suffered mechanical breakdowns during extended operations. Technical Sergeant Frank Wierzbowski, a maintenance officer with the 2nd Armored Division, noted in his field journal, "The German Panthers are impressive machines when they're running, but half of them break down from mechanical problems before they ever engage us. Our Shermans just keep going, hour after hour, day after day." It was during the Sicilian campaign that a particular Sherman in the 66th Armored Regiment gained its legendary name. Tank number T-230092, a standard M4A1 produced at Lima Locomotive Works in November 1942, was assigned to Staff Sergeant Donald Collier upon his transfer from the 1st Armored Division after Kasserine Pass. Collier, a former ranch hand from Montana who had enlisted in 1940, had already survived the destruction of 2 previous tanks. A taciturn, experienced, non-commissioned officer, he quickly molded his new 5-man crew into an effective unit. After a fierce engagement near Gela, where their Sherman destroyed 2 Italian Caro Armato M15 42 tanks and a German Panzer III in rapid succession, while sustaining 3 non-penetrating hits, bow gunner Grady Coon-Ass Travis painted the name Fury on the gun barrel, a name that would follow the tank through 2 years of continuous combat across 3 continents. By the time Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, the Sherman had become the backbone of American and British armored forces, but the strategic situation had evolved significantly. In North Africa and Sicily, the Sherman had primarily faced earlier generation German tanks like the Panzer III and I-4, against which it was roughly equivalent or superior. However, by mid-1944, the Germans had deployed increasing numbers of formidable new designs, the Panther and Tiger, that outclassed the Sherman in firepower, armor protection, and in open terrain, combat effectiveness. The Panther's high-velocity 75 meters K-42 42 gun could penetrate a Sherman's armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, while the Sherman's 75 M3 struggled to damage a Panther's sloped frontal armor even at close range. The even heavier Tiger I, with its devastating 80mm gun, could destroy Shermans from distances where the American tanks couldn't even effectively return fire. This disparity gave rise to grim gallows humor among Allied tankers, who nicknamed the Sherman the Runson, after a popular cigarette lighter advertised to light first time every time. Others called it the Tommy Cooker in British service, or simply the burning coffin. These morbid nicknames reflected a harsh reality. When hit, the Sherman's inadequate armor and poorly protected ammunition storage made catastrophic fires common. Technical Sergeant Miles Bible Swan, Fury's loader, later reflected, "Every Sherman crew knew exactly where the escape hatches were and practiced getting out fast. You had maybe 15 seconds once the ammo caught fire, and those seconds were the difference between going home or going home in a box." Yet despite these well-known vulnerabilities, Sherman crews developed tactics to mitigate their technical disadvantages. They learned to operate in mutually supporting platoons of 5 tanks, using terrain for concealment, engaging German armor from the flank whenever possible, and coordinating closely with artillery and infantry anti-tank teams. Sherman crews came to rely more on tactical skill than technical specifications, developing a hard-earned respect for their resilient, if outgunned, vehicles. As Corporal Boyd Bible Swan noted in a letter home, "Our Sherman may not be the biggest dog in the fight, but it's reliable, maneuverable, and there are always more of us than them. I've seen Panthers with their fancy guns sitting broken down by the roadside while we keep rolling. A tank that doesn't run isn't a threat to anyone except its crew." Indeed, the Sherman's mechanical reliability proved to be one of its greatest assets during the grueling campaign through France. While German tanks like the Panther and Tiger were engineering marvels, they were also maintenance-intensive, with complicated overlapping wheel suspensions, overloaded final drives, and underpowered engines for their weight. A Panther required an average of 12 hours of maintenance for every hour of operation, while a Sherman could typically operate for 25-30 hours before requiring significant maintenance. This reliability gap meant that even though the German tanks were superior in direct combat, they were frequently unavailable due to mechanical breakdowns, especially during extended operations or rapid advances. Fury and its crew experienced this reality during the breakout from Normandy in Operation Cobra. As American forces finally ruptured the German defensive line in late July 1944, armored columns began a rapid advance across France that would cover hundreds of miles in mere weeks. During this pursuit, Fury's maintenance requirements were limited to regular oil changes, track tension adjustments, and minor repairs that could be performed by the crew themselves, often in less than an hour. In contrast, captured German maintenance logs showed that Panther battalions frequently operated at less than 50% strength due to mechanical issues, even without combat losses. The campaign across France also highlighted another critical advantage of the Sherman, its strategic mobility. Weighing 33 tons compared to the Panther's 45 tons, or the Tiger's massive 56 tons, the Sherman could cross bridges that would collapse under German heavy tanks, traverse soft ground that would bog down its heavier adversaries, and be transported more easily by rail or ship. This mobility advantage extended to fuel efficiency as well. A Sherman could travel approximately 120 miles on a full tank, while a Tiger's range was limited to 60-70 miles on roads, even less cross-country. In the context of a rapidly moving front, where supply lines were stretched thin and every gallon of fuel had to be transported from distant ports, this efficiency translated into strategic advantage. As Allied forces approached the German border in September 1944, the nature of combat changed once again. The fluid advances of the summer gave way to increasingly determined German resistance, with carefully prepared defensive positions, extensive minefields, and well-coordinated anti-tank defenses. Here, the Sherman's vulnerabilities became more pronounced, particularly during frontal assaults against prepared positions. During a single day of fighting near Aachen in October 1944, the 3rd Armored Division lost 19 Shermans while advancing just 2 miles. A frustrated tank commander reportedly radioed, "We're fighting with pop guns and paper armor. For God's sake, give us something to fight with." The U.S. Army had actually developed a potential solution to the Sherman's inadequate firepower. In 1943, recognizing that the 75mm gun was becoming outclassed, ordnance engineers had designed a new turret that could accommodate the more powerful 76mm M1 gun, which fired a projectile at higher velocity, improving armor penetration. Production of the so-called 76mm Shermans began in early 1944, but their deployment to combat units was initially delayed due to ammunition supply issues and resistance from senior commanders who believed the existing 75mm gun was adequate for infantry support, which they considered the tank's primary role. General George S. Patton famously declared in early 1944, "I do not believe we need a better tank than the M4 with the 75mm gun. The 76mm gun is a divisive element. The 75mm gun gives us high explosive shells which are necessary to whip the Germans." This perspective, while perhaps valid for earlier phases of the war, proved dangerously outdated by late 1944, when Sherman tanks regularly encountered Panthers and Tigers. After heavy losses in Normandy and the subsequent campaigns, the deployment of 76mm armed Shermans accelerated, though they remained in the minority until the war's final months. Fury received its upgrade to the 76mm gun in November 1944, during a brief period when the 66th Armored Regiment was pulled back from the front for rest and refit. Staff Sergeant Collier ensured his crew received comprehensive training on the new weapon system. Technical Sergeant Norman "Machine" Ellison, who had replaced the previous gunner after he was wounded during fighting in the Ardennes, spent hours mastering the different ballistic characteristics of the new gun. "The 76 has a flatter trajectory and higher velocity," he noted in his diary. "It changes how you lead moving targets and requires adjusting your aim point on German armor. But when you connect with an armor-piercing round, the difference is night and day. I've seen the 75mm bounce off Panther frontal armor like a tennis ball. The 76mm goes through." The improved firepower came at a critical time. In December 1944, the German army launched its last major offensive in the West, the Ardennes Offensive, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. Catching Allied forces by surprise, German armored spearheads made significant initial advances, creating a large bulge in the American lines. The weather conditions, heavy snow, fog, and overcast skies, neutralized Allied air superiority, while the densely forested terrain channeled movement along predictable routes, creating perfect conditions for ambush. German forces committed over 400 Panthers and Tigers to the offensive, along with hundreds of other armored vehicles, creating perhaps the most challenging environment Sherman crews had yet faced. Fury and its crew were positioned near St. Vith, Belgium, when the offensive began on December 16th. Awakened by the thunder of German artillery, they quickly manned their tank as reports of enemy armor flooded the radio net. Within hours, they found themselves engaging German armor at dangerously close ranges in the fog-shrouded forest. Their first encounter came at a crossroads near the village of Poteau, where 3 Panthers had established an ambush position covering the main road. Private Norman Gordo Garcia, Fury's driver, later described the engagement. Visibility was maybe 75 yards in the fog. We were moving slow, Collier scanning with binoculars from the commander's hatch. He suddenly screamed, "Panther front, hard left." I cranked the Sherman left as the Panther fired, the shell passing just behind our turret. Machine, the gunner, got the 76 mm on target fast. You could see the muzzle flash through the fog, and put an armor-piercing round straight through the Panther's mantlet. Black smoke poured out as we backed into cover. The engagement continued for nearly an hour, with Fury maneuvering through the forest to engage the remaining Panthers from the flank, destroying a second and forcing the third to retreat. This action, though small in the context of the massive battle, exemplified how experienced Sherman crews could use their vehicles' advantages, mobility, reliability, and turret traverse speed, to overcome technically superior German armor, particularly in confined terrain where the German tanks couldn't utilize their range advantage. Throughout the Battle of the Bulge, Sherman crews faced extreme conditions beyond just enemy action. Winter temperatures regularly dropped below freezing, causing mechanical issues that required constant attention. Engines struggled to start in the cold, requiring careful maintenance, and sometimes open fires built underneath the engine compartment to warm the oil. Tracks threw more easily in snow and ice, requiring frequent adjustment. Inside the tank, conditions were scarcely better. The Sherman's interior was uninsulated, turning the steel hull into a freezer. Crews wore multiple layers of clothing, sometimes even their sleeping bags, while operating the vehicle. Despite these challenges, the Sherman's fundamental reliability meant that most mechanical issues could be addressed with field repairs, keeping the majority of vehicles operational throughout the offensive. By late January 1945, the German offensive had been contained and reversed, with American forces reclaiming all lost territory and inflicting heavy losses on German armored units. The Sherman had proven itself once again, not through technical superiority, but through availability, reliability, and the growing tactical skill of its crews. General Patton, who had previously dismissed the need for better tanks, now acknowledged, "The 76 mm gun on the Sherman is a tremendous improvement. While still not equal to the German 88 mm, it gives our tank crews a fighting chance, which is all Americans usually need." As Allied forces prepared for the final push into Germany, the Sherman underwent additional upgrades aimed at addressing its remaining deficiencies. The most significant was the introduction of wet stowage for ammunition storage. Previous Sherman models stored 75 mm or 76 mm rounds in sponsons along the hull sides, where they were vulnerable to penetrating hits. The new system placed the ammunition in water-jacketed containers below the turret floor, dramatically reducing the risk of catastrophic fires when the tank was hit. This modification, along with the addition of applique armor welded to vulnerable points, the wider tracks of the horizontal volute spring suspension (HVSS) system for better ground pressure distribution, and the more powerful 76mm gun, resulted in the M4A3E8 variant, popularly known as the Easy 8, which represented the Sherman's final and most effective form. Fury, however, did not receive the full Easy 8 modification package. As a veteran tank that had been in continuous service since 1942, it retained its vertical volute spring suspension (VVSS) system and received only selected upgrades: the 76mm gun, wet ammunition stowage, and additional armor welded to the hull front and turret. This hybrid configuration was common among tanks that were upgraded in field workshops rather than factory rebuilds, reflecting the pragmatic American approach of continuous improvement and modification of existing equipment rather than waiting for perfect replacements. By February 1945, as Allied forces breached the Siegfried Line and entered Germany proper, the strategic balance had shifted dramatically. German armor strength had been decimated by years of attritional warfare, fuel shortages, and strategic bombing of production facilities. The fearsome Tigers were now rare encounters, with fewer than 50 operational examples remaining on the Western Front. Panthers remained more numerous, but were increasingly operated by hastily trained crews who lacked the experience to maximize the vehicle's capabilities. In contrast, American tank production continued unabated, with factories shipping over 2,000 Shermans per month to replace combat losses and equip newly formed units. This shift was evident during Operation Lumberjack in March 1945, when Fury participated in the capture of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, the only Rhine River bridge captured intact by Allied forces. The rapid advance had caught German defenders unprepared, with demolition charges placed but not yet detonated when American forces arrived. Fury was among the first tanks to cross the bridge, providing fire support for infantry clearing German defensive positions on the eastern bank. During this operation, they engaged 3 Jagdpanzer Vieh tank destroyers, attempting to recapture the bridge approach, destroying 2 and damaging the third with well-placed 76mm shots to their more vulnerable side armor. The Remagen bridgehead created the opportunity for a major offensive into the German heartland. As Allied forces expanded their foothold east of the Rhine throughout March 1945, German resistance became increasingly disorganized, but no less determined. Fury and its crew found themselves engaged in almost daily combat, often against improvised battle groups comprised of whatever armored vehicles, anti-tank guns, and infantry the Germans could assemble. While these forces lacked the coordinated effectiveness of earlier German formations, they remained dangerous, particularly in defensive positions within the towns and villages that dotted the route of advance. On April 1, 1945, during the advance toward Paderborn, Fury encountered one of the war's most unusual adversaries, a Tiger II King Tiger heavy tank, the most formidable German tank of the war, weighing 68 tons with a high-velocity 80mm gun, and frontal armor impervious to all but the most powerful Allied anti-tank weapons. The King Tiger had established an ambush position covering a road junction near the town of Etteln, where it had already destroyed 3 Shermans from another company. Staff Sergeant Collier, recognizing the futility of a frontal engagement, directed his driver to take a concealed route through a stream bed that would bring them behind the German position. The approach took over an hour, requiring careful navigation over difficult terrain that would have bogged down the much heavier King Tiger. Technical Sergeant Ellison, Fury's gunner, described the final engagement. "We came up behind this monster. It was the biggest tank I'd ever seen, like a house with a gun." The commander was so focused on the main road that he never checked his rear. I put our first 76mm round right into the engine compartment from about 300 yards. Black diesel smoke poured out, but the turret started traversing toward us. I fired again, hitting the turret ring, which jammed at half-turned. The crew bailed out fast after that, running toward a nearby tree line. We didn't pursue. This encounter highlighted both the continuing technical superiority of German heavy tanks and the tactical advantages that allowed Sherman crews to overcome this disparity. The King Tiger was, on paper, virtually invulnerable to the Sherman's weapons from the front. However, its poor strategic mobility, limited situational awareness, German tanks notably lacked the vision cupolas that gave American tank commanders 360-degree visibility, and increasingly inexperienced crews meant that Sherman tanks could often maneuver to engage from more favorable positions. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany throughout April 1945, they encountered another disturbing reality of the Third Reich, the concentration camp system. Fury and elements of the 66th Armored Regiment were among the first American units to reach Ohrdruf, a subcamp of Buchenwald, on April 4, 1945. What they discovered there, hundreds of emaciated prisoners, mass graves, and evidence of systematic atrocities, profoundly affected the veteran tankers. Private First Class Garcia, Fury's driver, wrote home, "I thought I had seen the worst of war already. I was wrong. What we found in that camp will haunt me forever. Now I understand what we've really been fighting against all this time." The discovery strengthened the resolve of Fury's crew during the final weeks of the European campaign. Their advance continued eastward, with the objective of linking up with Soviet forces advancing from the east. By late April, they were operating near Leipzig when news arrived that elements of the U.S. First Army had made contact with Soviet troops near Torgau on the Elbe River. Within days, the announcement of Hitler's suicide and Germany's subsequent surrender brought combat operations in Europe to a close. When Victory in Europe Day was declared on May 8, 1945, Fury had been in continuous service for 29 months, participated in campaigns across 3 countries, and been credited with destroying 19 enemy tanks, including 3 Tigers and 8 Panthers, and numerous other armored vehicles, anti-tank guns, and fortified positions. Of its original crew, only Staff Sergeant Collier remained, having survived while seeing 4 complete crew rotations due to casualties and transfers. The tank itself had been damaged and repaired numerous times, received 3 different main guns during its service life, and are traveled over 2,800 miles under combat conditions, a testament to the Sherman's fundamental durability and maintainability. The human dimension of the Sherman tank story extends far beyond the battlefield exploits of individual vehicles like Fury. Behind each tank stood a vast industrial enterprise and logistical network that spanned continents. In American factories, workers, many of them women entering industrial work for the first time, maintained round-the-clock production schedules. At the peak of production in 1943, the Detroit tank arsenal alone produced over 100 Shermans per day. Marion Rousseau, who worked as a welder at the Lima tank plant from 1942 to 1945, recalled, "We knew every tank that rolled off the line was going to carry 5 of our boys into battle. That knowledge kept us going through double shifts and 7-day work weeks. I put my name and address inside the turret of each tank I worked on. 3 crews wrote back to me from overseas. 2 of those boys didn't make it home." The logistical system that transported these massive vehicles to battlefronts thousands of miles away represented another triumph of American organizational capacity. Shermans manufactured in Detroit or Lima, Ohio, would travel by rail to coastal ports, be loaded onto Liberty ships, sail across submarine-infested waters to ports in England, North Africa, or the Pacific, then be transported by rail and heavy transporters to frontline units. Accompanying each tank was a supply chain of spare parts, ammunition, fuel, and trained maintenance personnel. This logistical miracle allowed American and Allied forces to maintain high operational readiness rates that their German counterparts could only envy. For the tank crews themselves, the Sherman represented something more personal: home. A 5-man crew, commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator, bow gunner, lived in extremely close quarters, sharing a space roughly the size of a walk-in closet filled with ammunition, equipment, and machinery. They ate, slept, fought, and sometimes died together in the steel cocoon. The intense bonds formed between tank crews transcended normal military camaraderie, creating families forged in the crucible of combat. They developed their own language, rituals, and superstitions. Some refused to clean certain lucky talismans. Others would touch the barrel in a specific way before entering enemy territory. These practices helped humanize the mechanical environment and provided psychological comfort amid the chaos of war. Technical Sergeant Miles Swan, Fury's loader throughout much of 1944, described life inside a Sherman. "You live by your senses in that tank. Every smell meant something: hot metal, cordite, burning oil. Each had its own message. Every sound, too. You could tell a thrown track from a damaged drive sprocket just by the sound. After a while, you could feel when something wasn't right with your tank, like it was part of your own body. We slept on the Sherman, under it, beside it, and sometimes, during long movements, standing up inside it. The only privacy you had was inside your own head, and sometimes not even there. You got so you could read your crewmates' thoughts just by the way they shifted in their seats." The Sherman's interior layout reflected practical considerations rather than crew comfort. The commander sat in the turret's left rear, with the gunner to his front and the loader on the right side. The driver occupied the hull's front left position, with the assistant driver bow gunner on the right. Each position presented unique challenges and discomforts. The loader worked in a cramped space, constantly handling heavy 75mm or 76mm shells while avoiding the recoil of the main gun. The gunner needed exceptional concentration, operating both elevation and traverse controls while peering through a telescopic sight with extremely limited field of view. The driver navigated using 3 vision ports that offered minimal visibility, while controlling differential steering levers that required substantial physical strength, especially during extended operations. Despite these challenges, Sherman crews developed deep appreciation for their vehicle's positive qualities. The electrical turret traverse system was faster and more reliable than the hydraulic systems used in German tanks. The standardized construction meant that parts from disabled vehicles could easily be salvaged to repair others. The twin hatches on the turret roof allowed for rapid egress in emergencies, a feature absent on many German designs. Even the Sherman's high silhouette, often criticized as making it an easier target, provided more interior space than contemporary German tanks, reducing crew fatigue during extended operations. While Fury and thousands of other Shermans battled across Europe, the tank also served with distinction in the Pacific theater, though in smaller numbers and under very different combat conditions. The first Shermans arrived in the Pacific in time for the Guadalcanal campaign in late 1942, where they provided crucial fire support for Marine infantry against Japanese bunkers and defensive positions. Unlike in Europe, where Shermans frequently engaged enemy armor, Pacific operations primarily involved infantry support, bunker reduction, and flamethrower operations against deeply entrenched Japanese positions. The tropical environment of the Pacific Islands presented unique challenges for Sherman operation and maintenance. High humidity and salt air accelerated corrosion of metal components and electrical systems. Dense jungle vegetation, steep terrain, and coral formations tested the suspension and drivetrain to their limits. Tropical diseases affected both crews and maintenance personnel, while limited repair facilities on smaller islands meant that damaged vehicles often had to be evacuated by ship to rear area workshops. Despite these challenges, the Sherman's fundamental reliability made it well suited to Pacific operations, particularly as American forces advanced through the Philippines and approached the Japanese home islands in 1944 and 1945. The Sherman's versatility was demonstrated by the numerous specialized variants developed for specific combat roles. The M4A3R3 Zippo mounted a massive flamethrower in place of the main gun, proving devastatingly effective against Japanese bunkers during island-hopping campaigns. The M4A1 Rhinoceros featured a massive steel prow for clearing hedgerows in Normandy. The M4A3 E2 Jumbo received substantially increased armor for assault operations. The Sherman Crab mounted a rotating flail to detonate mines, while the Sherman DD, duplex drive, could actually swim ashore during amphibious landings thanks to a collapsible canvas flotation screen and propellers driven by the tank's engine. One of the most significant variants was the British Sherman Firefly, which mounted the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun. This 76.2mm weapon had significantly better armor penetration than the American 75mm or 76mm guns, capable of defeating a Tiger's frontal armor at combat ranges. However, accommodating the massive breach of the 17-pounder required extensive modifications to the Sherman's turret, reducing crew space and eliminating the coaxial machine gun. Though never adopted by American forces, who preferred their own 76mm gun, the Firefly served extensively with British and Commonwealth units, often deployed at a ratio of 1 Firefly per 4 standard Shermans to provide enhanced anti-tank capability. These specialized variants highlight a fundamental strength of the Sherman's design, its adaptability. The spacious engine compartment could accommodate multiple engine types, while the turret ring was large enough to accept several different main armaments. The basic chassis proved capable of supporting everything from bridge-laying equipment to rocket launchers, demolition charges to radar systems. This adaptability ensured the Sherman remained relevant throughout the war, evolving to meet changing tactical requirements rather than becoming obsolete as many pre-war designs had. As World War II drew to a close in Europe and later in the Pacific, the question of the Sherman's ultimate legacy remained open. Critics pointed to its inferior armor and firepower compared to late-war German designs, while supporters emphasized its reliability, strategic mobility, and the pragmatic production philosophy that ensured its availability in overwhelming numbers. Perhaps the most balanced assessment came from Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, who noted, "The Sherman tank has been called our infantry's best friend. While our tank design has not proven able to cope with the newest and heaviest German armor on equal terms, our Shermans were available in such great numbers that our armies remained mobile under the most adverse conditions." The debate intensified after the war's end when Belton Cooper's book Death Traps severely criticized the Sherman and the decisions that kept it in production instead of transitioning to the more capable M26 Pershing heavy tank. Cooper, who served as an ordnance officer responsible for recovering and repairing damaged tanks, witnessed firsthand the devastating effect of German anti-tank weapons on Sherman armor. His criticism centered on the decisions made by General Leslie McNair, who prioritized mobility, reliability, and mass production over armor protection and firepower, believing that dedicated tank destroyers rather than medium tanks should handle enemy armor. Yet this criticism, while valid in certain respects, overlooks the complex strategic context in which American tank development occurred. Unlike Germany, which fought primarily on interior lines with short supply chains, American tanks needed to be transported thousands of miles by ship, rail, and road. A heavier tank like the Pershing, while more capable in direct combat, presented significant logistical challenges. Fewer could be transported per cargo ship, more would break down during long road marches, and they consumed substantially more fuel. A critical consideration for armies operating at the end of extended supply lines. Moreover, the Sherman was designed and produced according to a specific American fighting doctrine that emphasized combined arms rather than tank versus tank combat. In this doctrine, medium tanks supported infantry and exploited breakthroughs, while purpose-built tank destroyers engaged enemy armor. That this doctrine proved imperfect in practice. Tank destroyers were often unavailable when needed, forcing Shermans into tank versus tank combat, for which they were not optimized, reflects the reality that no pre-war doctrine survives contact with the enemy unchanged. For the crews who fought in them, the Sherman's legacy was more personal and nuanced. Staff Sergeant Collier, like many veteran tank commanders, maintained a complex relationship with the vehicle that had carried him through years of combat. In a 1946 interview with the Armed Forces Radio Service, he reflected, "Was the Sherman the best tank of the war? No, not by a long shot, but it was our tank. It got us where we needed to go, and if you knew how to fight it, flank shots, hull-down positions, coordinating with artillery and air, it could hold its own. I saw plenty of Panthers and Tigers knocked out by Shermans, and I'm still here to talk about it." That says something. The Sherman's legacy extended well beyond World War II. Thousands were supplied to Allied nations during and after the war through the Lend-Lease program and later military assistance packages. Shermans served with distinction in the French, British, Canadian, Polish, and Soviet armies during the war, and continued in service with dozens of nations for decades afterward. The Israeli Defense Forces used heavily modified Shermans, the Super Sherman or M50, M51, with great effectiveness during the 1956 Suez Crisis and 1967 Six-Day War, even facing and defeating Soviet-built T-54-55 tanks that were a generation newer. Chile operated Shermans until the 1980s, while Paraguay maintained them in active service until 2018, over 70 years after the first examples rolled off American assembly lines. This remarkable longevity speaks to the fundamental soundness of the basic design and its adaptability to evolving battlefield requirements. While never the best tank by any single measure, armor, firepower, or mobility, the Sherman represented an effective compromise between these competing qualities, wrapped in a package that could be mass-produced using existing industrial capacity and maintained under field conditions by troops with limited technical training. Perhaps the most significant aspect of the Sherman's legacy was how it influenced post-war American tank design philosophy. The tensions between firepower, protection, mobility, and producibility that had shaped the Sherman's development continued to inform American armor doctrine through the Cold War and beyond. The M26 Pershing, M46, M47, M48 Patton series, and even aspects of the modern M1 Abrams can trace their design lineage back to lessons learned from the Sherman's combat experience. The pragmatic American approach, emphasizing reliability, maintainability, crew survivability, and iterative improvement, remains evident in modern U.S. armor. For Fury itself, the war's end brought not glory but utility. Like thousands of other Shermans, it was deemed surplus to requirements as the U.S. Army rapidly demobilized. After being shipped back to the United States, it was thoroughly refurbished at the Lima Army Tank Plant, its battle scars erased under fresh olive drab paint. Stripped of its machine guns and with its main gun rendered inoperable, the tank was sold to the Argentine government as part of a military assistance program in 1947. There, it served for another 18 years before being retired to become a static monument outside an Argentine military academy in Buenos Aires, where it remains today, far from the battlefields of Europe where it earned its fearsome name. Staff Sergeant Collier and the surviving members of Fury's various crews returned to civilian life with the millions of other American servicemen. Some adjusted well, others struggled with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. They carried with them memories of comrades lost, battles fought, and the peculiar intimacy of warfare experienced from within the confines of a Sherman tank. At occasional reunions of the 66th Armored Regiment, they would share stories that only fellow tankers could truly understand: the distinctive smell of cordite and hot oil, the bone-jarring impact of a near miss, the claustrophobic terror of being buttoned up under fire, and the simple joy of finding their trustworthy vehicle still operational after a night of hasty repairs. The M4 Sherman remains a subject of fascination for military historians, tank enthusiasts, and the general public alike. Its distinctive silhouette is immediately recognizable even to those with limited knowledge of military vehicles, appearing in countless films, documentaries, and video games. Surviving examples can be found in museums and at historical sites worldwide, preserved as tangible connections to the greatest conflict in human history. Some remain operational, maintained by dedicated enthusiasts who demonstrate them at military vehicle shows and reenactments, allowing new generations to experience the sight, sound, and presence of these historic machines. In analyzing the Sherman's place in history, context is crucial. It was designed in 1940-41, when American armored warfare doctrine was still developing, and the full implications of modern mechanized combat were not yet fully understood. It entered production before the United States formally entered World War II and remained in production until after hostilities ceased, an extraordinarily long production run that speaks to both the soundness of the basic design and the challenges of developing and deploying a replacement during wartime. It fought across every theater of the war, from the deserts of North Africa to the mountains of Italy, from the hedgerows of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, proving itself adaptable to wildly different terrain, climate conditions, and tactical requirements. Most importantly, the Sherman tank helped win World War II. Not because it was the best tank, it demonstrably was not, but because it was the right tank for America's strategic situation, industrial capacity, and global commitments. It was available when needed, in the quantities required, with the reliability necessary for extended operations far from major repair facilities. While German tanks might have dominated isolated tactical engagements, the Sherman dominated the strategic battlefield through sheer ubiquity. As Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov reportedly remarked when comparing American and German equipment, quantity has a quality all its own. For the men who crewed them, like the fictional but representative crew of Fury, the Sherman was not just a weapon, but a vessel that carried them through the most traumatic and transformative experience of their lives. They lived in it, fought from it, maintained it, modified it, cursed it, and ultimately depended on it for their very survival. Their stories, both individual and collective, form an integral part of the larger narrative of World War II, a conflict that reshaped global politics, redrew international boundaries, and established the technological and doctrinal foundations for modern warfare. The Sherman tank story encapsulates the American experience in World War II, initial unpreparedness followed by industrial mobilization on an unimaginable scale, technical disadvantages overcome through tactical adaptation and sheer numerical superiority, and ultimate victory achieved not through technological superiority, but through the combined application of adequate equipment in overwhelming quantities, operated by increasingly skilled and determined personnel. The M4 Sherman was never the best tank of World War II by any technical measure, but it was available in the right place, at the right time, in the right numbers, and with the right support structure to help win the largest conflict in human history. Today, the legacy of the Sherman and the men who fought in it endures. Each surviving tank, whether displayed in a museum, maintained as an operational vehicle, or standing as a memorial, represents not just an artifact of military technology, but a testament to human ingenuity, industrial capacity, and the courage of those who went to war in these steel beasts. The Sherman tank, born of compromise, baptized in fire, vindicated by history, stands as one of the most significant weapons platforms ever developed, not because it was the best tank, but because it was the right tank for its time and purpose. In the final analysis, Fury and the thousands of other Shermans that served from the deserts of North Africa to the mountains of Italy, from the hedgerows of Normandy to the forests of Germany and across the islands of the Pacific, represent something beyond their military significance. They embody the American approach to problem-solving, practical, adaptable, improvable, and ultimately successful despite imperfections. The Sherman tank is, in many ways, America itself, cast in steel, not flawless, sometimes outmatched, but resilient, resourceful, and ultimately triumphant through a combination of industrial power, human ingenuity, and unwavering resolve. Its story, from drawing board to battlefield to museum piece, mirrors the American century, a tale of technical achievement, strategic vision, human sacrifice, and eventual victory against seemingly insurmountable odds.